everyone. We're just about to get started online. Are you ready? All right, for folks online, I'm testing the audio. If you can hear me, just submit a question that says you can hear me. Thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you, ladies.
All right. Welcome to our meeting today. This is the Council on Educational Services for Exceptional Children. I'm Leanna George. I'm the chair of this committee. I'm the parent of 2 children on the autism spectrum. I have my son with me today. He is actually homeschooled. My daughter resides in a group home out in Marion, North Carolina, and attends the high school there. So, and we'll go to the right.
Misty Hutchinson, Special Ed Director for Lincoln Charter School, and for this council, I'm the charter school rep.
Diane Coffey, and I'm a parent of 2 special needs kids, and I'm in the western state up in.
I'm Lisa Phillips.
Yeah, what is the noise? Static.
I do not.
I'm with you, it's driving me crazy. I can't hear her.
I can hear myself.
Maybe your water bottle?
No,
It's still here.
What's your microwave?
No, I don't think it's that. It might be somebody online.
That happened yesterday too.
Okay.
good, it's not me, because I was getting ready to make, okay. Whew, happened yesterday. Glad it's not me.
DC Director, Lincoln Charter School.
Diane Coffey, parent rep, for special needs and from the western community.
Lisa Phillips, State Coordinator for the North Carolina Homeless Education Program, part of Federal Program Monitoring and Support here at DPI.
Jenny Moorfield, regular ed teacher, interpreter for the deaf, parent of a child with traumatic brain injury.
Marge Terhart, IHE rep, professor at Meredith College, coordinator of the graduate programs of special ed, and parent of 2 adult sons with ADHD.
Good morning, Kenya Pope. I'm the EC Compliance Specialist for Juvenile Justice. I'm sitting in this morning for my supervisor.
Good morning, I'm Carolyn Hudgens. I'm the Texas Juvenile Policy Monitor and Council. If I could, I want to acknowledge you for participating virtually, and I'm going to unmute Anna, so that you can introduce yourself. Go ahead, Anna.
Hey, this is Anna Carter,
Shay, you will need to unmute your own line.
Hi everybody, this is Tashay. I'm the Parent Training and Information Center Director with Good morning, I'm Cynthia Daniels Hall. I'm a parent in Wayne County of children with autism. I also work with families across the state as an education advocate, and I also work with NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, and I state-trained young family program.
Thank you, Cynthia. Jennifer, you're unmuted. Good morning, Jennifer. I have your line unmuted. Her mic is not working. Jennifer, do you want to type anything in the question box so we can introduce you? Jennifer, I did hear you a little bit, so I think something's working.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh, hi, I'm Jennifer Egan. I'm from Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools. I'm a facilitator at East Mecklenburg High School.
Excellent, thank you, Jennifer. And Kristen.
Good morning. Kristen Hodges. I have a child with an IEP. I'm a parent of a child with 504. I'm also a school elementary school counselor in Rowan County. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kristen.
I'm Becky Scott,
Teach finance special assistant for North Carolina Grove School and admin service council.
Daniel Sanders, admin for supervision policy and
Good morning, I'm Sherry Thomas, I'm the Director of the Exceptional Children Division. It's nice to be here today.
And I'm Christy Grant with the Traditional LEA, EC Director in Nash Rocky Mountain Schools.
And so we have two guests in the gallery. Would you like to introduce yourselves? It's not required, but I'd like to know who's here. Nice to have you here. Thank you for being here. We appreciate the support and input from you. So, we'll move along. I'm sure we've all had the opportunity to read the agenda and the meeting minutes. I'm trying to think, do we have time? We'd like to go ahead and move to vote for approval of the meeting, the minutes from the last meeting. Or summary of actions. All right. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? And is all in favor, or if they just want to type it up there if they're in favor?
Type it in the message box. Folks online, we are voting to approve the minutes as read, as written. If you approve the minutes, then you can touch the report approved. Thank you, ladies, we have that.
All right, thank you very much. I just wanted to open up the floor if there's anybody who'd like to nominate somebody. I'm willing to maintain as chair. I'm not sure if Cynthia Daniels wanted to step down from vice chair, she's staying on. But if there's anybody who wants to potentially run or nominate for chair or vice chair, I just thought I'd open the floor up for that, if there's anybody who would like to take on that mantle. Is there anybody on the,
If any position is open, so if either one of you don't want to serve, I think that Christy Hutchinson is very organized and on top of things and
yeah.
could handle us.
I'm sure she could too, but would Christy be interested in taking that
You
up?
ask for nominations.
Yeah. Does Christy need another hat to fill?
I've thought about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We might come back during committee time and make a formal,
Just saying if either you or Cynthia did not want to continue. Not putting you on the spot, Christy.
So, may I recognize Cynthia? She's asked to be unmuted to address the group.
Okay.
Cynthia, we're ready for you. Cynthia, your line is unmuted whenever you're ready.
So, Leanna, you're opening up nominations for chair.
yes, if there's anybody interested in running for chair.
So, can I ask, are you stepping down?
I'm willing to stay as chair. I have no problem with that. But just, if there's anybody who thought they might do a more effective job as chair, considering the craziness we've had over the summer, I was just willing to open up the floor so that if anybody would like to take on that mantle, that they were, if they felt like they had the opportunity to, that I'm not trying to squelch anybody else's leadership potential or desires, if that makes sense to the group.
So, according to our policy, the chair serves for a period of time. If you're opening up the chair, I don't think you should consider this as a referendum on you or your capabilities, because I think you served in an excellent capacity as chair. So, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
I just wanted, if there's any desire, so. if anybody wants to say anything, say it by lunchtime, and we'll figure it out. And if we need to do a vote after lunch, we can. So, I mean, I'm opening up that door if anybody wants to go through it. It's not an easy job being chair, but anyway. Let's move forward. We have a wonderful presenter, Becky from Alliance. I've known her for quite a while now. She's here to present on mental first aid. I know mental health first aid. I know Johnson County Schools is doing a lot with that right now, and I'd love to hear more about what they're doing, how we can implement it with the support of the MCOs and other schools and things like that. I'm not sure how much she was giving a heads up, but yeah. But she's awesome. She'll be good.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that. Thanks, Leanna, for inviting me. We'll get the presentation. And this is a PowerPoint that I have retooled a little bit that has been given to me by the Mental Health First Aid USA from the National Council for Behavioral Health. So we're reworked it a little bit to fit this presentation. In full disclosure, because it was just kind of a comedy of errors, I was pulling some information about our numbers because I wanted to really provide you some information around what we were doing, not only in Johnston County, but within Alliance Health, our organization itself. And my computer crashed last night. So I have a few of those numbers, but I can always email them to Tish and they can get out to the mass audience once I take my computer to IT today. So again, thanks for having me. We'll go ahead and cue the first slide. Prior to kind of introducing what mental health first aid is, I'll tell you a little bit about Alliance Health and my background. I am a former EC teacher and school administrator, so my passion and my love is this population, and I value every single thing that you all do for our children and families. I stayed home for 3 years with my little babies and decided when I wanted to return to work that a school administrator job was not in alignment with my family goals at this time. And so I fell into this and doing community education work. And so I am a certified youth mental health first aid trainer, and I absolutely love it. And I also work closely with the other school systems, specifically Johnston County, because that's where my office is located, in doing suicide prevention, talking about safe social media for students, giving trainings to parents at PTAs and back to school nights on parenting skills. One of the big pushes in Johnston County right now is resilience, and they're working on the resilience project. They actually have a couple of schools specifically that they're working with, but showing that film Resilience, if you haven't seen it, it's wonderful. Please view it, and really talking to our schools about trauma and being trauma informed, and what that means for our little ones that come today, and our big ones that come today to come to school every day not knowing what their home life is looking like. And the focus of those conversations is not just what we're doing inside of the school building for the kids, but what are we doing for the caregivers? Because if the caregivers are suffering trauma, we know it's intergenerational, and if we're not taking care of the caregivers cannot take care of the kids that they're slated to care for. So again, thank you for being here. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about what I do, and then let's get into the crux of mental health first aid. And so mental health first aid, it's a national program. It's across the country, and it's actually worldwide. It's the initial help offered to a person developing a mental health or substance use problem or experiencing a mental health crisis. So it is that intervention piece. There's a small piece of prevention in it, but really what we look at is intervening. The first aid's given until appropriate treatment and support are received or until the crisis resolves. And how I look at that is I think about many of us are first aid trained, right? Certified and trained in first aid. So this is the first aid component for mental health. We are not going to treat, we are not going to diagnose, we're going to provide first aid until we can get that person over to someone else who is more experienced, more apt, more equipped to deal with the situation, or if the situation has passed. So in our training, it is an 8-hour workshop. Typically, we do 8 hours. We tend to use 2 trainers. I'm a former educator, and that's why standing up at a podium is not my thing, so I really like to move around and use my hands. So I apologize for that. It's hard to keep myself still standing up here. I usually do it by myself because I am comfortable in a room, in a classroom setting. So I usually take on that 8-hour training myself, but you can have a second trainer there, and you can also split it up into 2 days, so a 4-hour session and a 4-hour session, depending upon the group that you're working with. And so we look at risk factors and warning signs of mental health and substance use problems, information on depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis, and substance use. And then we talk about the 5-step action plan. That's a huge component. It's called ALGE, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's that 5-step action plan to help someone who is developing a mental health problem or is having a potential crisis or is in crisis. And we actually do some role-playing scenarios within the training as we walk through an individual that is not in crisis to slowly developing and turning into a crisis. And then we talk about evidence-based professional peer and self-help resources nationally and locally. And you can see there's youth mental health, there is a Spanish version down there, and then we have an adult version. And then within those 3 versions, there are different modules that we'll talk about as well. Thank you. And so this is the action plan I talked about, ALGE, and that's ALGE right there up in the corner. He is our little koala bear representative. And ALGE actually came from Australia. That's why you see the koala bear. That's where the curriculum originated and came over to the US. So we talk about ALGE, assess, listen, give reassurance and information, encourage appropriate professional help, and encourage self-help and support strategies. And what we teach in this course is that although ALGE is linear, because the word is linear, it is not a linear system. And so we may pick up anywhere within that system. We also learn that we're always going to listen non-judgmentally. So it's not just step number 2 that's where we listen non-judgmentally. It happens throughout the 5-step process. But just knowing that those are 5 of those steps, it may start anywhere. We're always going to assess for risk of suicide or harm. We're always going to listen non-judgmentally. But where it might differ is we might be able to encourage, we might be encouraging self-help and other supports instead of appropriate professional help. Those E's may change. You may do one and not the other. You may do one before the other, depending upon the situation. So, why do we need mental health first aid? I say to everyone that everyone needs this. It is that important. Everyone needs this course. And we need it because mental health problems are common. We know that stigma is associated with mental health problems, and that's part of what we talk about in the course, is breaking down those barriers and breaking down the stigma around mental health. Professional help is not always on hand. You may live in a rural community. That person may be isolated, not have transportation. You may be, in a one-on-one arena with someone, and professional help may not be right at hand. So you need to be able to have those skills in your toolbox to help that individual. Oops, that's okay. Individuals with mental health problems, they often do not seek help, and that's another thing that we talk about. It typically takes someone 10 years to seek treatment. That is on average 10 years to seek treatment for a mental health issue. And so that's huge. And so oftentimes we need to provide those supports, and we need to be having those conversations with them to get them into treatment quicker. Many people are not well informed and don't know how to respond. We just don't know. Not that you don't want to respond or that you want to do harm, that you just don't know. That the knowledge is not there. So in the course, we're going to learn how to notice when someone needs help, promote understanding and have that common language around mental health. Again, breaking down that stigma and those barriers and having a common language. Encourage community members to support one another. That's huge. Help more people get the help that they need, and then learn how to intervene. And truly, you might save a life. Knowledge is power. And so there's ALGE. He is our hero. 4 reasons to become a mental health first aider, that you are prepared. It is just like CPR, that when a crisis occurs, you are prepared. You have the tools to help assist and provide aid. Number 2, mental illnesses are common. We talked about that. 1 in 5 people will experience one in a given year. We also know that people recover from mental illness and can be well if given the right support and the right treatment. Number 3, that you care. You want to be there for a family, a friend, a colleague. Know how to start the conversation. And that you can help, that you have the power to help someone, that it's not necessarily that someone needs a professional to help them through a situation, that you can be that one person that can be a benefit to them. Learn when and how to step in and offer your support. And so I talked about this just a few minutes ago. This is what we do where mental health first aid can help. We're looking at that yellow section. So we're looking at just a little bit of the prevention, just the very tip, but primarily early intervention. We want to intervene and then link that person with resources, whether it's professional help or self-help, or get them to someplace, whether it is an emergency room or something like that. Again, depending upon the situation. Every situation is different. Every situation will be triaged differently. However, you're still going to use that ALGE format in terms of the steps. So we're not looking at recovery, we're not looking at diagnosing, but we're looking in the area of where someone is becoming unwell and that is currently unwell. And so who are our mental health first aiders? I say it's everyone. So we look at teachers and supervisors and first responders, and former First Lady Michelle Obama is a trained first aider. And you know, her blurb right there is it really gives you the skills you need to identify and ultimately help someone in need. And again, that is just so powerful. I think because we're all here on earth to help each other and support each other, so let's put some more tools in our toolkit to do that. Oh gosh. So this is a super tiny graphic. And so it looked a lot bigger on my computer. Who we're reaching. So this is brand new and updated. I pulled this off of the website a couple days ago. And in North Carolina, can I just look over your shoulder by chance?
72,000.
Thank you so much. So 72,000 have been trained. I will tell you, again, I'll give you a little bit of information about Johnston County and Alliance Health. So Alliance Health alone, we have 16 trained trainers in adult and youth mental health first aid. I alone, I only came on board about a year ago and just got trained in May. But since May of having my youth mental health first aid certification, I've taught 3 classes with about 50 individuals now in Johnston County that have been trained as mental health first aiders. Some of my colleagues and my peers within Alliance Health do upwards to 30 classes a year. You can go to our website and find all of those trainings, which I will provide to you all. Right now, they are free to the community. They're located in Johnston County, in Wake County, in Durham County, and in Cumberland County. You don't have to be a resident of that particular county to go and attend. So get on that website and take a look at that, and I'll provide you with some more information. Your mental health first aid brochure on the back of it, it also has all of the mental health first aid contacts for each of our catchment areas, so you can follow up. And so these are the people that we're actually reaching, okay? So we talked about 72,000 people that we have currently trained in North Carolina, but this is the breakdown of who we're actually reaching. 10.43% of social services, law enforcement, 11.7% of law enforcement and public safety. We actually trained 80 Department of Public Safety employees in the last couple of months in Johnston County, so that's fantastic and fabulous. I fully believe that this should be part of the crisis intervention team training, that it should be required for them to go through mental health first aid. They have a lot of other great components of that course, which is a 40-hour-long week for EMS and first responders to be trained in crisis intervention, but not specifically in mental health first aid. And so I really think that that should be a huge component of their training. It could be a full day for them as one of their as part of their 40-hour component. So we're working on it. Who else do I think we should be reaching is every single person that works in the school system. I mean, that is just anybody that comes across a child should have this information and this knowledge. So we're working on it. We're getting there. I was actually trained and certified through a grant that came down from North Carolina PTA. So I was able to get training through that. So that's amazing. It's coming down the pike slowly but surely. And so again, here are the states that are most trained. Kind of makes sense a little bit. You're looking at California and Texas, 1 and 3. But when you also look at the size of people, so that makes sense that they may have more people that are trained. But there are currently mental health first aiders in all 50 states, Puerto Rico and Guam. So pretty cool.
What did you mean by 1 and 3?
Can you go back? One and 3, the largest states. California has the most because it's again, it makes sense because it's a large state.
Okay.
Texas is 3rd. It's a huge state.
Okay.
Just
I
size
thought you
wise.
meant 1 in 3 people.
No, ma'am. Nope. Yes.
And you said that in North Carolina, we have 72,000 that have been
Correct.
trained?
Correct.
We have a question from the audience.
Yes.
Abby, you're unmuted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning. I actually do have a question. When you were talking about just a second ago about the different people that you're trying to reach and how you especially think the people in the schools should be reached out for this, which I totally agree with. I'm guessing that this is probably each county kind of has their own thing of the way they do it. In Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, if there is ever a attempt for suicide or any child that is having a mental crisis, it always goes straight to the guidance counselor, and the guidance counselor then does a suicide intervention where they ask a bunch of questions and it's an evaluation, I should say, and then they score it. I think it's a 1, 2, and 3, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, from that, can you tell me if the people probably in North Carolina that do have, I think it was 72,000 that have been trained, are a lot of those guidance counselors, or who are those people?
I honestly don't have those numbers in front of me. I could probably pull it from the National Council for Behavioral Health. I could probably get those numbers for you. But I do know that in every district, things are done differently. And so you will find that in some school districts, there is a huge push to get teachers and staff trained, but that also costs money and dollars, and that's why we need to advocate for more money for social emotional learning and social emotional health and well-being. But everybody does it differently, and I know in fact in every school system those suicide risk protocols look differently as well. When I think about boots on the ground and who should be trained first, like triage, I would say, yes, school counselors should really have it, school social workers, and then you're looking at teachers and then administrators and then some of those other support staff. But I don't know that is across the board and how each and every district is doing it.
Okay, I totally agree. I think that this is great. I've seen the ones that CMS uses, their guidance counselors use, and this is way more in-depth, and I love this.
I do know that I worked with Johnston County Public Schools at the beginning of the school year, and they did not have a protocol in place for a student that came and had a risk of suicide or thoughts of suicide or suicidal ideation. And so Alliance Health and some other community partners worked with the school district to get that protocol in place. Not having anything to do with mental health first aid, but as you can see across the board and across the state, there's great differences and variations of what each school district has in place and what each school district needs to have in place.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And so to your, the 72,000, and just dawned on me too. So this is also, the slide that had the state on it is the most updated version. This, I'm guessing, is a few years old because it is their promotional material, and I chunked in that brand new, most recent slide. So those numbers are going to look different. Thank you for pointing that out, somebody. Yeah. So I don't know if we can play this. I believe that this is a little video snapshot from a phone call to a movement. I hope we can do it. If not, no, it's not happening. Okay, sure. We'll see if we can make it work.
Is it on YouTube?
It's not clicking.
Carol Ann. Yeah, there you go.
Maybe? Looked like it wanted to do something, didn't it? we'll move right along. It's not a big deal. Didn't want to do it. And so the video gave a little history about mental health first aid and how it came about. And so it originated in Australia, and the movement really happened over time. And for the curriculum for mental health first aid in the United States was actually written and developed at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And so the National Council for Behavioral Health is housed there, and they do a wealth of trainings in Washington, D.C., and that's kind of where it developed. So that was just a little bit of a background of mental health first aid, but y'all will get it. Y'all are smart. Be the one to make a difference. This is just a campaign that was launched by the National Council, and it's verbiage and language that I use in the training all the time. And I just think it's important to have that language, is that, you know, you could be the one. You could be the one that could be the difference that makes the difference in that person's or that individual's life. You know, as educators and teachers, that's what we think about all the time in our classroom, that we could be the one that really makes a difference in a child's life. And so think about how powerful it could be that you're the one that actually saves a life by intervening and having this knowledge. So the value of mental health first aid, you know, I think it's priceless to me, but of course there is a dollar figure. So our manuals are about $20. How we run our program, at least at Alliance Health, and again, everybody across the country does it a little bit differently. We were able to purchase lots of manuals in the last few years. We are quickly running out of them, which is, I guess, a double-edged sword because we're doing a lot of training, but the money is also running out too. So we have currently, I run every other month an open community class. And it's open to the community for free. I provide the textbooks for youth mental health first aid. And that's in Smithfield and Johnston County. My colleague, James Osborne, he does adult mental health first aid for me, and I just swapped it. I do a class every month. He does it every other month because I have to pull him from Wake County. And so he does a class for me every other month for adult mental health first aid. And again, those are community kind of open forum classes. Anybody can register for them. I'm also slowly starting to do some closed courses for organizations and groups. The health department is wanting to do a course for me, wants me to do a course for them. And so they purchase those manuals at $18.95 a manual. They're going to hold on to them and keep them, and then I'm going to do it. The training is provided for free by me or my colleague.
So how can we get information on that training? Is that on your website?
So you have a mental health first aid flyer there. On the back should be the contact information, but I'll also give you the website where you can go onto our website and you can see all of the trainings that are coming up. Because I'm talking specifically about Johnston County, we have 3 other catchment areas that also do trainings. I heard a little ding. Oh, is that you or me? Okay. So mental health first aid works. It really is, it's proven to work. On a daily basis, we're presented with people dealing with mental illness. Every day this training will be beneficial. These are people that have taken it from a pastor to a peer support specialist to a police officer. This is just information about what people are saying on Twitter and online. We'll get to some really interesting information that Lady Gaga is doing. There's a movement now for teen mental health first aid, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. It has really taken flight. There's some exciting stuff going on with that and support through her foundation and through her efforts. So why should my employees be trained? I mean, I think we can all understand why a school system should be trained, but why an organization or a private company or something of that nature? Well, we know, again, 1 in 5 American adults experience a mental illness each year. But look at that next component. Employers face an estimated $80 to $100 billion in direct costs annually due to mental illness and substance use, including lost productivity and absenteeism. That's huge. And so when we look at, I'll also give you a link to AFSP. We might even be able to pull it up later on if we have some time, because I really would like to show you that interactive website where you can get some specific information around North Carolina and some of those statistics. But 10.8 million full-time workers have a substance use disorder. 10.8 million. We know that when characteristics, when things continue to compound, when they build up on each other, that there is a greater risk of developing a mental illness. So when I talk about substance use disorder, when I talk about poverty, when I talk about a family member that has also died by suicide, those statistics start to increase and rise, that you will develop a mental health disorder as well. So government support, this is the Mental Health First Aid Act of 2015. It authorized $20 million for mental health first aid. Again, this is 2015. And then down below, $15 million annually in mental health first aid appropriations. These are the modules, and so I am only trained in youth mental health first aid. However, some of my colleagues are trained in other modules so that they would provide the adult mental health first aid course, but then there would be a component for veterans. So that's Mental Health First Aid USA right there. That's specifically for veterans. There's a Spanish component down at the bottom right. Mental Health First USA top right is for our first responders and law enforcement. And then there is also one for higher education, which I think is really interesting. And that's a module that is included in the mental health first aid. And so these are some of the components about what it talks about. It talks about some of our active duty and our reserve military. 30% of them are deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan have a mental health condition. PTSD, it is real, it is valid. People are coming home from war and experiencing things and seeing things that we cannot even comprehend, and they can't comprehend how to handle it. And oftentimes we're talking about our men, typically, not only men, but primarily men, and we know that men often seek treatment less often than women. Mental health first aid for higher education. So this is, the demands of school. We know that mental health issues and suicide rates increase as we get older. And as we get older, it's oftentimes because our stressors become greater. And so there is that window from when a student is either leaving high school and going into college and experiencing the real world, or maybe not going into college. And then those young adults that are leaving college and then trying to figure out what they do. We have found that there are spikes and increases of potential of suicide attempts and completed suicides in the age range. And so this is our public safety. I say it all the time. I totally believe that all of our public safety officers, specifically those that are working on those crisis intervention teams, need to have this. Approximately 20,000 public safety professionals have taken the course. Again, this was about 2015, I think, that this specific promotional material was developed. So I'm sure that is much greater now. Police academies in Philly, DC, Seattle, and numerous smaller and rural departments. Even in Little Joco, we are working hard to get our public safety officers trained. Youth mental health first aid. This is my baby. It introduces participants to the unique risk factors and warning signs of mental health problems in adolescence, because it oftentimes looks different, and it oftentimes looks like normal adolescent development. So it's super important to know just the small nuances between what normal adolescent development looks like and when we might be walking into a potential mental health crisis or mental health challenge or mental health disorder. It builds understanding of the importance of early intervention, teaches individuals how to help an adolescent in crisis or experiencing a mental health challenge, and the course is designed for adults who regularly interact with adolescents. So we're talking about our teachers, our school staff, our coaches, our youth group leaders, our parents, and anyone else that you can think of that may interact with our youth ages 12 to 18. Specifically, that course is meant for those youth that are 12 to 18 years of age. And so that little snippet of video that we missed, it gave a little bit more background about this, but again, it originated in Australia. It's currently in 23 countries. The adult course is for 18 years and older. And again, that youth course is for 12 to 18. It's available both in Spanish and English. Mental health first aid included in SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. So it's evidence-based. There is research that says that this is working. So this is the adult curriculum overview. We're not going to go heavily on it, but these are some of the modules that if you were to take the adult course, what we would talk about and what we would go over. There are some, again, role plays. I know in the youth there is an anxiety attack role play. We know that anxiety attacks often look like heart attacks, and so being able to triage the difference, and that if you don't know the difference and you don't know the individual that is experiencing that issue, then you call 911, that you treat it like a heart attack. So there's just some important things that you can do every single day. Again, knowledge is power, and having those tools in your toolkit are really important. I can't really see over there. So evidence, it's mental health first aid. This is just evidence behind mental health first aid. I believe that this might have been another video, but we're gonna move right along with that. Increases knowledge and understanding. Encourages people helping people, which is huge. That's why we're here on earth, I believe. Supports people getting help. Decreases social distance. And increases mental wellness. So the first aid instructor course, this is the course that I went through. And it's fairly intensive. It's a 5-day training. I went to one that was a 3-day training, so it was extremely intensive. But again, it teaches you all of the components that we would need to teach you all. Some of them do allow for approved CEUs. I know I took the course. Again, it was a grant that was given by North Carolina PTA that I applied to participate and was thankfully granted the opportunity to become an instructor. They did several of them. I know one was in Raleigh. I actually went to the one I believe that was in Charlotte because I had other obligations here in Raleigh, and I think they were doing another area around. And now I recognize your face.
I did the
now I recognize you.
training in Charlotte.
Yeah, I felt like I knew you from
Down by the
somewhere.
airport.
Yes, okay, I was there. So, yeah, small world. So why should I be an instructor? Connecting, advocating, educating, leading, bringing your community together, reducing stigma, having some common language, showing others how they can be beneficial and how they can help. This is mental health first aid in the news. Again, I hope that, if this slide or this can be shared with all of you. You can click on those links and read a little bit about it. But what I wanted to highlight was Lady Gaga's announcement that Teen Mental Health First Aid Pilot Program will expand to 20 additional high schools. That was June 11th, 2019, and I actually just got a snippet somewhere in August. They've now expanded it to 35 more schools. So really excited about what's coming down the pike there. The difference between teen mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid is that this is teens teaching teens. So, go ahead. Oh,
I just didn't realize
yep. And so, again, how they can help a peer, how they can intervene, how they can be the one to support. Again, not diagnosing, not treating, but just knowing those signs and getting them. Oftentimes we find that when youth do say something, they say something to a friend. So find or host a course. This is one of the great places that you can go to find or host a course. This is mentalhealthfirstaid.org. This is going to give you your national registry. So anywhere in the U.S. you can find where courses are available and where you can take one. And then that is me. Take a course through Alliance Health, please. And again, there are other great organizations that are doing it locally as well. Again, I'm here as an Alliance representative, so I know those in my right-hand pocket. But again, you can go to our website. You can feel free to email me. I can give you that information about locally what is happening in your area. But again, we all need to advocate for training. We all need to advocate that this is so important for our teachers, for anyone that interacts with, again, my priority is youth, that's my passion, but for anyone, truly. You just never know who you're going to come across. Questions for me? Oh, become a mental health instructor. Go to that website as well. Questions for me? Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Becky.
Oh, you know what? I do have just a few minutes. Can I bring up AFSP for all of you that don't know it?
Sure.
Is there any way we can do that so I can just show? I'd love to show you the statistics for North Carolina. There's a really great infographic, and it's quite astonishing. And I think it's important information for you all to have. AFSP, for those that don't know, is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. They do community walks to raise awareness and reduce stigma around suicide and mental health and wellness. Oh, sure. I know I am walking in Fuquay Varina's Walk. I know they have one in Durham. I'm sure that there is one in Raleigh, a big one in Raleigh. Disclosure, I lost my first love of my life to suicide in 2004, and so I am extremely passionate around this subject and this topic. You know, you never know who you're going, again, to run across and what they may need and what help they may need. So I just feel like as long as I can do this work, I will continue to advocate.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go here, you want to go to about suicide. And then if you scroll down here, it's all kinds of great information. What I really am astounded by is looking at some of these statistics here. And so suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the U.S. And this is pertinent, up-to-date stuff. And in fact, the infographic that I'm going to show you, I think, is a 2019 infographic. In 2017, 47,173 Americans died by suicide. In 2017, there were an estimated 1.4 million attempts. And it cost the U.S. in 2015 $69 billion. And if you scroll a little bit further down here, and you get all this other information, but you can go here and click on North Carolina. And then I can do the fact sheet, and that's really what I want you all to see. So here is your state facts here. And so, number of deaths by suicide in North Carolina, 1,521. Nationally, 47,173. This is rates per 100,000 in the population. State rank is 35. But what's really amazing is that it's the second leading cause of death for ages 15 to 34. Second leading cause of death. And so if we're not talking about it, what are we doing about it? This is really, again, website is a wealth of information. You can go to all 50 states and take a look at it and get some really important information. Sign up for a walk, donate, advocate, and come find me if you'd like to take a course. Thank you again.
You may not know the answer, but I know we have teachers here on the group. What is currently in the health PE requirement? I'm sure we still have that for high school students for graduation. Is there a mental health component, first aid component that is included in that? Could there be one that we have included in that? Because I think that might be a great tool for them and whatnot. So.
For the students?
Yes.
PE standards include starting in right down to kindergarten.
Yeah.
I mean, just at, varied degrees and obviously structured, but.
Yeah. Might need to look at the,
middle school becomes really chunky in emotional, mental health and peer relationships and healthy relationships in every aspect of that.
And I don't know about statewide, but I know, again, I can speak for Johnston County Public Schools because I work so closely with them. They have a director of social emotional learning now at the district level, and every school is required in their SIP plan to have a social emotional learning goal for their school and for their staff. And so that's something that we've also been working on with them as to how to get them to their goal.
And I can speak to Nash Rocky Mount schools in that aspect. We did have, last year, we have a district mental health coordinator who's kind of doing the same thing, overseeing our threat assessment and suicide protocols. And we have 4 mental health first aid trainers, and so we do provide training. One of the trainings that we found, or the participants found to be the most powerful, was our PE teachers and our coaches, because they have really good relationships with our students, and they were just astonished by, we weren't really sure with a bunch of football coaches and baseball coaches and all, how that would end up, but they have really, the feedback we've gotten over the years is, you know, can we get updated on that training? I mean, it's been a while, so it's been really interesting to see. They're the ones that the kids really talk with as well, along with our counselors and, of course, our support staff. We have a 5-year plan where every person in our school district will eventually have youth mental health first aid training. So we've got several schools that are doing it now. We also, we've had to write several grants because it is kind of expensive with the manuals, but it is very worth it. And we're fixing to actually have a training where we have a grant. We've paired up with firefighters and our sheriff's department, and are fixing to do several trainings with them. So it is an extremely valuable training.
And the courses, once you have taken the 8-hour course, it's a certification that you receive, and the certification is good for 3 years. I did not mention that, but you will be certified for 3 years before that certification expires. I know several organizations and agencies require it for their staff, and they retake it every 3 years.
So one thing I would like to mention, we here at the agency in our division have a SAMHSA grant that is working with 3 pilot sites around school mental health, and it's in conjunction with DHHS. So it was nice to see a lot of that referenced. Cleveland, Rockingham, and Beaufort counties are the 3 that are in the pilots. So we're hoping to see some good work for that. I think it's a 5-year grant, and so the idea is to build that capacity in those, use those as demonstration sites, and then build that across the state. So it's good work. It's unfortunately highly needed work, but it's good work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. If everyone's available, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for our ECATS demo with Carol Ann. I'm sure she's looking forward to that. All right. But yeah, that was really good.
For those of you online, I'm gonna mute the lines so that you're not hearing the room noise. And I'm gonna be switching computers, so it'll be quiet for just a minute for you guys during the break, so just hang in there. Thank you.
So not all schools have a suicide prevention protocol, so.
All right. Danielle, does that get our mics too? Does it get our mics too?
I just turned it back on.
Okay. Mics back up. So welcome back. Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I am excited to be able to take you through a little demonstration of ECATS. At some point, I will be stopping and catching my breath to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask me any questions that you might have, so that we can give you a peek at those things that might be of interest to you. All right, I'm not clicking more than once. All right, this is what you get when you're running two computers at one time. Hold on just a second. All right, here we go. This is what we call the dashboard for ECATS, and as you can see, there's a lot of information on this screen just right away. So I'm going to do my best to enlarge my screen when it comes to those particular areas that I'd like to focus on. Right here at the top is our announcement window, and in this announcement window, we have the opportunity to be able to push out messages to all of our users from the state level. We can also have the ability for the district to be able to push out its own messages to its users. We believe that this is going to be a really helpful tool when reminding the field of head counts, any kind of reminders that we need to offer regarding reporting timelines, any useful tips or adjustments to the system. We really feel like this will be a very helpful place. As you can see, I am in the training site. I also tend to call this the sandbox because what we have in here are students that we have just created for the purposes of training. This is not live student data, so I want to be sure that we share that up front. It is a demonstration site, and as you can see by some of the messages that are scrolling now, we provided CEUs to our teachers if they participated in training. We have a survey in the announcement box, and we have just some training related messages currently in the sandbox. All right, as we walk down and look a little further or scroll down in our sandbox a little bit further and on the dashboard, we have what we call widgets here. And these widgets are designed to show an aggregate view of a variety of things. We have information around compliance. We have information around a school caseload. We have information for students with overdue dates. Percentage of time students are being served in general education or in special education settings, how many students that we have in referral, how many are eligible, and so forth. And I'm going to start clicking on some of these in just a moment. What I want to share before we get to that is your dashboard populates based on your user type. So if I am a superintendent in a district, I'm going to be able to see all of my schools as my caseload school dashboard. And so the principle of the colors here is very much like the traffic light. Green means I'm good to go, I'm in compliance. Yellow means I have a warning that something is about to become due. And red means I have something overdue and I have to attend to it right away. So if I'm a superintendent and I'm looking at the health of my schools, just very quickly by the pie charts listed here, if you can see my cursor moving up and broken down, I can tell just very quickly how my schools are doing in compliance. And if I'm seeing some areas perhaps that have more red or even a sliver of red, I can hover over this pie chart here and I can see exactly a percentage or what that percentage means on that pie chart. And so, for example, here I've clicked on the Children Village Academy, and when I'm hovering over the pie chart, it says that I have 91% compliance in the school, meaning 22 out of 24 of my students has compliance, either meaning that they have a current eligibility and they have a current IEP in place for that student. And so, again, this is just demonstration data for the purposes of today and for our training, but it gives you a lot of valuable information just right when you log on to the screen. This also works for us here at the state. Our state aggregate view has all of the schools populated, or all of the districts populated, and so we can get similar information when we're looking at the state view. And we find that particularly exciting because, as you all know, we have been a state with third-party vendors, and so that would mean that we would have to look at our information through a variety of means and not have it necessarily at our fingertips in such a manner as it is now. So we're really excited by this, and we're excited that we have now the ability to look at things in real time. What I'm doing here is I'm zooming in on some of the widgets here. I spoke about the one in the middle regarding caseload in schools, and now I'm looking over to my left, and I'm looking at the compliance here regarding those IEPs for initial students, initial evaluations, IEPs, and PSSP is the private school services plan. So we do have to monitor those private school services plan that we are serving with our proportionate share funds at the district level. And so you can just see here what the compliance, again, in the little chart above, green is in compliance, yellow is coming due, red is out of compliance. And so that just gives me the breakdown across my district. I'm going to go along this row, and I'm going to go over here to the right where we have students with overdue dates. And what I see here is that we have 345 students who may be overdue for either getting consent for an evaluation, which requires parent consent, written parent consent, or I could be potentially over for consent for that initial placement in which parents have to provide that initial written consent before we are able to serve students with special education. The nice thing about this chart is who might those 345 students be. And so if I click on the bar graph, it shows me exactly who those students are. And it looks like third grade has been a bumper year for either referrals or placement decisions. Again, this is demonstration site, but what a valuable piece of information here that something is happening in third grade in my district. And so that would just be an example of how this information could be particularly useful if I'm looking at, one, how I need to allocate my resources, because if we have a high number of students perhaps that are in the third grade or being referred at third grade, what are some things that we might want to probe a little deeper to find out? Are there difficulties with the referral process? Are there difficulties with providing interventions prior to referrals? Are we having a lot of children enter the district for the first time at third grade? So again, not necessarily hypothesizing that any of what I just shared would be the case, but it would be a starting point that I would, at least as a superintendent or a building administrator, say, what's going on in third grade in this building? And why do we have so many students who are overdue in third grade in this building? And so again, I feel like that's a real useful piece of information that, depending on what your vantage point is, you could start asking some essential questions about programming, not only in general ed settings, but you could ask about programming regarding exceptional children. All right, and so that works as well for the bar graphs around eligible students. And we have a lot of kindergartners who are overdue. Again, I can, make some hypothesis. Is there anything around transition from Part B to C or from preschool to kindergarten programs? Are we having a lot of referrals in kindergarten for whatever reason? Or are a lot of these referrals prompted by particular notification mechanisms? When you have more detailed knowledge about your particular LEA and your particular district, this helps inform trends. It gives you a snapshot of what patterns might be or where you might need to allocate additional resources. Maybe we have a lot of kindergartner teachers that are making referrals who might be new teachers and might need to have some additional professional development around the developmental stages of all children at the kindergarten level, and that what might be prompting a referral is actually an appropriate developmental difference for children who are very young. And so just some examples of how data could be used from the dashboard here. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm actually going to pause and catch my breath and check on the folks online and see if they have any questions for me, and then I'll come to you, Jenny. Okay, Abby, I'm checking with you right now. Can you hear me better now? Can you submit a question that says you can hear me? Okay, thank you, Abby. I'm going to go to Jenny now. Jenny, you have a question for me?
Yes, I think at the beginning you said something about that one of the capabilities with this platform was that the user could send out information. So would, let's say you were the administrator and you saw the chart up at the top that had, your categories of students who had something that was overdue. Are you able to send like a mass message to all of, I don't know if it would be a case manager or a parent or whatever, to let them know, hey, if you're getting this message, it means you have something overdue. Are you able, can they do that from there?
So,
like send a mass?
So your question has a couple layers that I want to address. Okay. First of all, the announcement window pane here is more for general announcements because this pushes out to all users. This is not likely where we would want to have student-specific or teacher-specific information regarding their caseloads, whether they're compliant or not. Then the second part of your question is around compliance, and teachers have their caseloads assigned to them. And when I get a little further in the presentation, the system is designed on its own to be able to show those alerts around compliance. So in terms of messaging, emailing within the system, that is not the capacity for the system. It's really a data dashboard, a data management system, and for communication between case managers, from districts to teachers, from the state to districts, that is better handled through our email systems rather than inside of this system.
So I know that this is a demo that we're looking at. So if for instance, I was the coordinator for, let's say I was the coordinator for Wake County. So would my opening dashboard, the announcements dashboard, would it look the same as this? Or, because I also remember you saying that, it depends on what your user function is. So like if a teacher were to log into ECATS versus a school administrator or at the district level administrator, do their announcements boards look the same, or does that also change depending?
So the announcement board is going to be consistent across the users, no matter your user type. Okay. Your dashboard is going to have the same widgets, but the information that is displayed in the widget is based on your permission and your role. So if I am a 5th grade teacher at ACE Academy, I'm only going to be seeing those students that I'm associated with.
Right.
I'm either delivering a service to them or I am on their IEP. And so then my dashboard is only going to show the student for whom I have a direct responsibility for. Now, that's at the student and service provider level. So then if I'm a school administrator, I could see all the students in my building.
that are under that.
Okay? If I am a regional supervisor, like for a big district, I might be supervising, like a program specialist. I could be supervising multiple schools. So in my dashboard, I would see all the schools, and then I could drill down by school to see all the students and the case managers. And so that, that dashboard populates up based on, 1, your need to know, and 2, your permission
Right.
granted in the system.
So if I were a district administrator and I wanted to check in and I were to see, and I'm just using the overdue thing as an example. So I cannot then just like click from there to get a drop down and message all. So I would look at that and go, okay, and then have to go to the email
Correct.
in order to create that
Correct.
reminder. Okay.
Yeah, correct. The system didn't contemplate mass emailing inside of the system. That gets into a different type of user utility, and so it was not intended to be a back and forth communication tool
I see.
as much as it is intended to be a data management tool.
And is there any kind of like notification system set up within ECATS that would, like if you had something that was coming due, does it notify the teacher, the admin, or whomever?
So we did have alerts built in place for, let me rephrase that. We do have alerts built in place that, based on your role, you can get an aggregate of such and such is coming due. You need to attend to
Right.
this. During the implementation phase, we turned off that mass communication because if you're a building principal of 2,300 students and 500 of them
Yeah.
are students with disabilities, then you could potentially get 500 daily messages about the status of a student. And so the way we are organizing that, we certainly don't want folks to become blind to
Right,
those
right.
to those messages, and that's what happens when there's mass emailing. So what we have done is we have turned that feature off right now during implementation.
That makes sense.
And we are wanting to train the users to the compliance symbols inside of the system.
That makes sense.
Okay? Any other questions? Did that prompt any other questions? Okay. All right. Jenny, you're going to keep me sharp today, I can tell.
Jenny's awesome, so.
She is awesome.
Jenny's a problem finder a lot of times.
No, if I can answer your questions today, I'm going to consider it a
answer
good day.
Well, and I'm just thinking if I had to use this and it was my responsibility to stay on top of this data, I wouldn't want to have to go, okay, now I've got to send 500 emails out.
Yes.
But that does make sense to turn the notifications off when you're learning how to do it.
So one of the things that I'm going to raise on behalf of those friends of us that are on virtually, they're very interested in the questions that you guys raise here. So you might have to hug your mic a little bit, which is why I'm leaning toward mine. So if you guys will reciprocate and lean into your mic, I'll try to remember to repeat your questions, but I think my multitasker is about multitasking out between 2 computers. So if y'all will help me with that this morning, that would just be fabulous. Okay, so I'm moving on down to the widgets here, and it looks like by this widget, we are serving everybody in the regular classroom. And so we are pushing in our services in this particular aggregate view, and this just shows how students are being placed. They are regular on the continuum, okay? All right, so students by time in special education, and let me rephrase what I said by the first widget, students by placement, special ed setting. So you know, depending on the time of day that you are receiving services determines whether or not you're considered regular, resource, or separate in terms of federal reporting for your time spent in special ed. So if we look at students by percentage of time in special ed, most of our students in this aggregate view are being pulled out less than 40% of the day. And then we can see the next one, we have students between 40 and 79% of the day. And then we just have 13 students who spend 80% or more of their day in a special ed setting. And so that we consider that good stuff, right? That they're getting access to the general curriculum with supplemental aids and supports, okay? All right, students by status. This works similar to the other widget that I showed you. How many students do I have in referral, and so forth. And so when I click on this, I can search these students by using this search window. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes. I want to continue with the main menu, and we'll get to this. That's my little teaser for a search. So coming on down, I think then another very interesting widget that we have here is our students by disability. And this is representative of my district. And so many times you guys have raised questions about how do districts make decisions about the professional development that they provide. How do they look to recruit and retain teachers? What are the needs of students in a particular district? So in this school district, which is what this view shows, most of my individuals with disabilities in the training site are individuals with learning disabilities. And so I can see how that has spread out amongst the sample size that we have here. So I could click on these students and see the students here who are considered intellectually disabled. And so, again, that kind of helps you drill down based on what the disability categories are here, representative of your school, of your district, and of the state. And so, based on this information, I might probe it a little further and see if there are patterns with where these students fall. Again, do I have a lot of students with speech impairments in the early grades? That would be what I would expect, is a lot of children with speech impairments in the early grades. Where do our other children fall out? Again, we could click on these bar graphs and find some more detailed information. Okay? As we scroll down to the bottom here, there's another message center with alerts and action items. This gets to your point, Jenny, about some of those automated benefits of the system, talking to me about my caseload and what my responsibilities are. My reports, this is just a quick way there's multiple ways to get to things in the system. My reports, any reports that I have run recently, it will populate in this window so I don't have to click to another screen. I can just go back and forth to the report that I've wanted. The next tab is a tab of resources that we have provided for a variety of purposes. Certainly, there are special education support documents here, service logging, intervention and planning documents, but for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to click on the special education documents here. And what these documents show us, and I'm going to minimize my screen for a minute. If I go over, there's quick reference cards for where to find things if I need to navigate the system and I can't remember how to get to something. These are little tips that are collected here. The user manual here, this is not a user guide to teach you how to do special ed, in other words, but this is more about how to find things if you are conducting a reevaluation and you need to remember what tabs to click on inside of the system. You can go to this user guide to help you figure that out. And then there's a training guide here as well. One of the other features that will come in here is that the ability of the district to be able to load their own training documents. So if we have, if Christy, for example, has a special ed manual for her school district that helps their teachers comply with what local policy is and state policy, then she could upload that here to this tab and they would be able to find it at that point. The district can customize that.
We can add like functional behavior assessments that aren't statewide forms or BIPs.
Yes, you can use other documents that are local approved documents there. Okay, they're standalone. In other words, they're not necessarily editable or actionable in terms of typing in them in live in the system.
Access.
It's just access to different things. Because to Christy's point, districts have sometimes some cover letters, some different communications that they like to use with their families that are pretty routine for their special ed programs, and so they have the ability to load them on here. All right, questions for me? I'm going to check over in the chat box. It looks like we're okay in the chat box. Any questions here on the dashboard for me? All right, I'm going to go back to the top here and look at what I call the ribbon. And the ribbon is this top blue area here. You see our nice ECATS logo. If I were in Nash Rocky Mount School District, it's going to populate right here. Why that's important is for us at the state, if we are problem solving with a director about a particular case, we can go into that LEA and it helps us know what LEA we're sitting in when we're working on activities. Then this is my user, my calendar. My calendar will populate with my meetings that are coming forward, but it does not interface with like an Outlook calendar or an Outlook email provider calendar. It's just a calendar within the system. And then what we have across the top is the main menu, which takes us to the dashboard. We can look up students by going to the student tab. In Wizards, we have a variety of tools that help the users develop their progress reports, to review accommodations, to look at service logs, to set up their caseload. Wizards are intended to group students together that are going to have the same function performed. If it's progress report time and I'm a case manager, then I would use this wizard to pull all of my children together so I could start reporting on their progress. Okay? Progress monitoring. If you guys recall, one of the things that we were very excited about is the progress monitoring tool that progress monitors directly from the IEP, that we are able to collect data on those particular goals and objectives if they're appropriate, and then look at that information on a graph and then bring that information into the progress report. We have not had an option in North Carolina for the progress monitoring to be organized in this manner. And so what we've elected to do is focus our implementation training on just getting into the system. Our second wave of training will come around using the progress monitoring tool. Because if you think about implementation, we've got to get active IEPs and data into the system so that then we have those goals and objectives then that can interface with the progress monitoring tool and begin to collect data. And as you can imagine, that is going to be a fairly significant training effort. And so we didn't want to layer that on top of implementation at this time because it's so important. We want to make sure that we're dealing with implementation first first and then doing a really good job with the progress monitoring tool that's available. Now, just as a point of interest, the progress monitoring tool is not a requirement that LEAs have to use or that case managers have to use. However, one of our goals when we provide this training is to show the wonderful benefits of this tool, that it makes it so highly desirable. Our districts and our teachers will elect to make that part of how they progress monitor. And remember, I will say this, there are multiple ways to progress monitor goals and objectives, and even though we have this wonderful tool in the system, I would think that we would want to have multiple ways of progress monitoring, and this would just be one of those tools we might elect to use. Okay? Questions here?
This is Jenny. I just wanted to ask, when it does become available and trained and are using, will parents have access to that information?
So currently, parents are not a user inside of the system. However, this information can be brought into the child's progress report. So where you might be getting a progress report right now that says meeting goal, not met goal, and so forth, the progress monitoring data from that goal can then be brought in the graph of that data displayed where that IEP goal is. So yes, parents will have access to the information, and of course at any time that could be run for an IEP meeting and so forth, but in terms of being an active user in the system, no.
But would it, like, if I wanted, because the last meeting or meeting before where the fellow from DPI came in and showed us some progress monitoring tools, I've started asking that of my child's therapists and teachers. And so I can interact with that daily so that I can tell his private therapists and doctors and specialists what they're working on at school. So is that something that the teacher could easily email me, or would I have to have it printed out every time I wanted a copy of it?
So there's probably a combination of both of those that can happen.
Okay.
And we will factor that into how we roll out the training about how it can be accessible, when it's appropriate to have it accessible, and for whom.
Okay.
Okay?
And this is Christy. Carolyn, I know you said this, but I just want to make sure I processed it right. When will the progress monitoring component?
The progress
be able to
monitoring
use it?
component is live
It's live.
now. And so districts can elect to start working toward that independently.
The videos are in there, though.
No,
Yes.
we have it. We have it, and we have IEPs in, but we're not seeing the progress monitoring piece, so we'll talk.
Yeah. So it's already built into the system. And so, yes, Christy, I can answer you in more detail. But at this time, we have not been doing a big push on it for training for the reasons I've mentioned. Okay? Other questions for progress monitoring or anything that I've covered so far? Okay, so my account, any documents that I've run or create, I can go to my docs. Reporting, my reports, standard reports, advanced reporting. Standard reports indicates that we have a particular set of reports that can be run based on your user type on demand, and I'll take you through that once I get through some more student-specific demonstration that I'd like to do. And the early warning system, how many of you have remembered hearing about the early warning system through our interventions through MTSS? And this information shows you if students are at risk based on the intervention data that they're receiving. This is the tab for that area. My specialty and my involvement with the product has been in the special ed module, so I'm going to spend most of my time demonstrating that today. Okay? So let's go ahead and let's look at students. So I can search students a variety of ways. I can look at their last name. I can go to their particular school, particular grade level. I can look and see what their status is. Maybe I want to know all eligible students in 3rd grade. So I could put in that demographic information. I can also look up the student ID by the PowerSchool ID, because remember, this is integrated with PowerSchool. So now I can use that same number to locate a student. That might be particularly helpful when we have students who have very similar names, and that does happen across the state. We can also do an advanced search where, to Jenny's point, some of those things about compliance, maybe I want to look at, pardon me, students who are overdue, maybe in 3rd grade. Again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that the options for searching for students or groups of students are wide and varied. You can look up by disability type. You can look up by placement, preschool setting placements, regular resource. You can find a variety of things here in placement. For special ed services, maybe I am reviewing my staff for the year, and I know that I have a need for students who are receiving, adapted physical education, and I might need to know how many students in my district have adapted physical education on their IEP and where are they located. So it might help me inform the kind of staffing and expertise that I might need. All right, and then others that become really important for school districts are related services. For example, audiology. How many kids do I have with audiological services? And as you can imagine, not only for allocating resources, but for scheduling. Where are those students located? If I have a really large LEA, large by definition of geographically, it's deep and wide, for example, where are those kids located and how might I need to allocate those resources to cover those students? And then, pardon me, I've embraced allergy season, so pardon me. The other thing I can do is, as a teacher, I can view my own caseload. So I can just click on caseload, and everyone that I'm either providing a service to, which means I'm on their IEP team and I provide services to them. And maybe I'm the case manager who I'm also providing services, but I'm also maintaining their special ed record. I can pull up my caseload that way. All right, questions here on looking for students? All right, so I have been working with some students here, and for the purposes of demonstrating, let's just say this is my caseload. And what do I notice right away about this column? If you recall what I'm saying about colors, what comes kind of clear right away?
You got stuff to do.
I have stuff to do. That is very good, Jenny. And so,
Your IEP, you can't see those.
right, I have quite a few things that are approaching. Now, I'm just going to walk down this list because there's a lot of good information here. The clear check means that student is not eligible for special education services. So the question might be, why am I seeing this on the EC side? And that's because at any given time, that student might be referred, and I might need to start on the initial referral process and need access to that student's information. Green check looks like I'm in good shape. Red, again, if I hover over these, either the eligibility or the IEP is out of compliance. Now, Christy and Christy are really interested in this column because when it comes head count time, they're going to be flapping in the wind for all of these stop signs, because that means that we as a state cannot allocate funding for 3 students on this page because their eligibility and or their IEP is out of date. So, very important stuff here. And then, of course, something's coming due pretty quickly. And again, this just kind of gives us some information as far as where some difficulties might be, some opportunities for reminders, some further investigation about what is happening with these students. And again, just kind of following that on across, we have the case managers. Again, since this is training, they're just user types here, but I could look here and see if we have similar users who are having difficulty managing their caseload. So we might have to offer some different support for that teacher, because it could be the perfect storm that we have a new classroom and the students assigned to that classroom all had activities coming up with their IEPs very quickly. So we might want to allocate some more supports to help that teacher bring things into compliance. Okay, questions here?
We're still working through glitches, though. Some of those red stop signs aren't really red stop signs.
Yes, so let me further explain
For
that.
those of us who don't like to sleep at night with red stop
Yes.
signs, some of those are fake red stop
Yes.
signs.
And for the record, there have been moments in time this fall that I thought I would break out in hives with the ECATS logo.
Yes.
As my hive marks. But one of the things that LEAs are working on right now is to clean up their dashboards. And what Christy is referencing is that when we brought in data from our third-party sources, some of our students that had been exited out of the EC process may or may not have had some of their files closed and verified. And so it's bringing it over, appearing that it's active and the student is not active. So that's causing a lot of people angst right now. And so we're working with our LEAs, and we provided some information about how those students can be properly closed out, for lack of a better word.
And when we initiate a reeval, it's showing a red stop sign too.
So it's good times all the way around, Christy, right?
For some of us that like no red stop signs, it causes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm smiling because I love the sense of urgency, but you're smiling because your sense of urgency is crippling. So. But
on the iPhone, the notifications, I can't handle it. Same, red dots, I can't handle it.
So just for the folks online, we're just having a sidebar conversation about those alerts that we're trying to get fixed, and that everyone has a sense of urgency around correcting those. So any other questions or comments on this part? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select Hope Test just for demonstration. Anything that is underlined can be, is a hyperlink, and it will take me directly to it. So where I started off with you guys is the dashboard for the county or caseload. Where I am now is the student profile for a particular student. So I'm just looking at a particular student, and that landing page has a lot of cumulative information here. So what I'm seeing here for this student is that, again, just kind of the personal information, who their parent or guardian might be, who their teachers might be, their birth date, and so forth. Then as I click across the tabs here, I get more and more different kinds of information. So if I am implementing some interventions and I have some performance data for a variety of things, those informations come up here. Okay? Brings it over. So remember we talked about the integration between MTSS and ECATS, or the special ed modules. And so for our districts who are in the room, there's some testing going on here in the training site. So don't let anything give you some heartburn here while we're working, okay? Because I saw Christy's eyes. This Christy, not that Christy. All right. So again, with the integration for PowerSchool, any of the grades that will be coming in for this school year, we can click and see them here on this tab. Again, the same would be true for attendance. And then academic, and I may have told you wrong here on the performance data. Academic, this tab is the MTSS tab. So if you're working and you're receiving tiered support, here is your progress monitoring data at an aggregate level, meaning it's kind of summarized here for a variety of things that are going on. So we have some progress monitoring data here. I know I've got a data point right here relative to behavior, social, emotional. You can see, or maybe if I would enlarge this, you could see what some of the charts are the keys to the chart. This blue little diamond is talking about behavioral data. Tells me I collected it on the 29th. Again, why this might be important for the EC teacher is if they are getting ready to provide a present level of performance, and they are trying to determine whether or not a child might need some additional support through their special ed program, they could look at this progress monitoring data from things that are happening in general education to factor into maybe an IEP team discussion about what is needed. Maybe more is needed, maybe less is needed, maybe something different needs to be changed. Okay. Ideally, what we would be seeing is that children are making progress with their supports, and so we know that we've got a solid program in place. And then for special education, we know who's on the IEP team, the dates of the IEP, and here at this screen too, we can see our hyperlink into the IEP document. So this is where we're going to pause, and I'm going to take you through this about what the new forms look like. And you'll recall from different times I've shared information here that the forms are baked into the system, that depending on what the child needs and what the IEP team agrees upon is what prints out on the forms. And so this is a completed IEP for this particular student. And so for you all, this might be of interest because this is what you're going to see when you go to a meeting. So your IEP will have your child's information up at the top. It'll have, instead of ECAT's training site, it'll say your school. And then, of course, we have the student profile. If you'll remember, the way we organized the forms is we wanted all the information about the child very early on in the IEP so we would know how to program. So what are their strengths? What are their concerns? What is the student's vision for the future? What are the parents' concerns? And then we get into the present levels of academic and functional performance. So any of the areas that we assessed, where did that information come from? And then the team has to answer the question, does the child need specially designed instruction? And so if the team requires specially designed instruction, that tells me that I need to have a goal and or accommodations and supplemental aids and supports and or services for this particular area of need. So families, if you have a child in the initial evaluation process and your comprehensive evaluation had multiple areas that were assessed, you're going to see each of those areas assessed here with that source of information and then a present level of performance around that. And the team will decide yes or no if that particular area requires services. Okay? All right, here's an opportunity to talk about any relevant medical information, and then how does that disability impact the involvement and the progress in the general curriculum, and then here is the special factors area. Okay? And again, this is the output, and I'm going to go back in the interface and show you where some of these things are located for teachers to put in the information. We know what the special factors are around behavior, hearing needs, does the child require adapted physical education? And one thing I wanted to point out again, that was something that we've discussed in past council opportunities, is are parents fully aware of the content standards that their children are engaging with? Do they know that they're in the standard content? Do they know that they're in the occupational course of study? Do they know that they're on extended content standards? So this question is in the relevant special factors information for every child. So it really is meant to be a time of critical conversation and transparency with the families, because as we know, if children are on the extended content standards, they are progressing through curriculum much slower than their typical peers. And extended content standards do not result in a high school diploma. And so that's a critical piece of information sometimes that does not get the discussion warranted until high school. And for a variety of reasons, you can imagine that's probably not the time that it needs to be discussed. It needs to be discussed early on, especially when you're making a significant deviation for a child's program away from the standard content. Okay? And then there's an opportunity to capture additional parent concerns. Again, transition. Will the child be 14 during the transition of during the IEP? No. All the parts associated with post-secondary, measurable annual goals. Here are the goals, how we're going to document mastery, how it will be measured, is assistive technology required. And you can see we said social emotional at the beginning of the IEP required, especially design instruction. So this is where we're addressing that area of need. We also talk about if it's related to transition, and are there any integrated services that are supporting that goal. And then also we have the ability, if the IEP team, depending on when the IEP team is meeting, if they're speaking to ESY at that time, then you can make a decision about whether those particular goals are going to be addressed during extended school year. Okay, and then how we document services in the least restrictive environment, how those are itemized. There are specially designed instruction for social emotional skills. We also have physical therapy, and there are also going to be supplemental aids and supports that are provided at 2 times a week for 30 minutes. This part is the accommodations where the child is participating. Many of you are familiar with the participations and how those accommodations are included. Any kind of supports for school personnel, participation in state and district-wide testing, alternate assessments, so forth. Again, a lot of this for demonstration purposes has just been run through very quickly. You wouldn't see specially designed instruction for recess. You would probably see accommodations for recess. I'm just pointing that out because there are some things here that you may be scratching your head about seeing for demonstration purposes. And again, it's really meant to highlight the big parts of the IEP, okay? And there's where you capture the IEP team participants. Now, we haven't gotten very far into the system to be able to see all of that information. And so I'm going to catch my breath here because I see that we have a question in the chat box, so I'm going to look over here real quick. Okay, so Cache has a question here regarding the continuum of services and LRE. If you recall from the old state forms, when considering least restrictive environment, the team would check off what they considered resource, regular, separate, and then all of the early childhood placement options. And so that was on the IEP that IEP teams could check off. So Cachet's question is, she didn't notice that on the IEP. How do parents know if their regular resource are separate? And so one of the things that we considered when we were developing this system is that sometimes an unintended thing that was happening around that time is that teachers often got into jiggling the numbers and services because they had a separate class and they wanted the child's services to fit in a separate class. And so separate on the continuum began to be interpreted as separate class. And what resource, regular resource and separate originally and still is intended to achieve is a federal reporting time, just so that we can notify the feds about how long students are spending in special ed settings. It was to describe chunks of time. It was not intended to describe the child's location of service, whether they were in resource or separate. So because that information only needed to be a federal reporting item, we calculated that time in the background depending on how the student services were listed. And so to Cachet's question, I'm going to go back to the IEP document here, and I'm going to look at the services that this student has. So essentially, what I'm interested in is how much time is my child in special education away from kids. And if I look at the location of my services here, I'm receiving two different types of service, but one is in the general education location and one is at in the special education setting. So for 30 minutes a day, I'm pulled away from my friends, or not my friends, bad word, but from typical developing peers. I'm in a special ed setting for special ed services. And so what we know about regular resource and separate is, remember, separate is more than 80% of your day away from typical peers. I am not considered separate here because where is most of my day spent? Most of my day is spent in the general ed setting. And so for federal reporting purposes, I'm going to look like regular on the continuum. And so we felt it was really important for parents to understand where their child was receiving services, not the classification of how they were receiving services in terms of regular, resource, and separate. So here, if you had more special education, then you are increasing in that continuum of removal from your typical peers, and that's defined by the location of your service, whether it's general ed or special ed. And so we believe what's really important is that specially designed instruction is based on a student's need, not the classroom they're attending, okay? Because resource and separate is all a special ed setting, okay? And so we wanted to kind of walk away from those labeling of classrooms based on a federal reporting continuum. So that is a long explanation for why it's not there. And I'm checking over here, and it looks like I answered Cachet's question, and I see a question from Cynthia, so let me look at that. Okay, so the question is who will be required to explain the continuum to the parent? And that will be the IEP team. The IEP team is talking about the least restrictive environment, so it's their responsibility to talk about this when they're talking about the services that are required for a student. Okay? Other questions for me? Okay? All right, so I think that's probably one of the biggest things that would be of interest to the parent council is seeing that IEP and the new look of the IEP. So the next part that I'm going to just quickly highlight through is how the system is intended to be efficient for our teachers. And so the EC process tab I have highlighted here, and I'm going to zoom in for just a moment, is highlighted here. And so based on what kind of EC process that I have to engage in, it's organized such that teachers can come in here and plan for their meetings. And so, of course, invitations, getting ready for a meeting. So, of course, I would need an invitation to the parent. If I'm going to invite any kind of outside agencies for transition services, I've got to get permission from the parents to have them included. If I'm excusing an IEP team member, I have to get the parents' approval to do so. And so anything related to the invitation to meeting is all kind of packaged here together. That's why we like the tabs. The referral is where it's all built together. We might have a school-age referral, we might have a kindergarten referral, and those questions unique to each of those age groups would be found here on the tab. I'm going to take a breath because I have another question here. So Cashay's question from the audience, from virtual, is: are signatures required on the IEP? Are signatures still required, or are names typed in? If no physical signature, how is accountability monitored? Okay, so brace yourself for another wordy response. So, signatures on an IEP is not required by any federal or state statute. The IEP simply documents those that participated in the IEP team meeting. The signature, there's not a signature place that says you agree or disagree. Your signature does the same thing as a typed in name. It says that you were present. So from the state's perspective, there's no requirement for a signature for an IEP team meeting. Now, local LEAs can determine whether or not they want to have that signature. And so that's perfectly reasonable that Christy and Christy could say, hey, at all of our meetings, we're having our parents sign IEP team meetings. And that's perfectly fine, because local has the authority to be able to make that as part of their practice, but it is not required. And then the second part of her question is, how is accountability measured? So for the things that require a parent signature, which is the initial consent for evaluation and the initial consent for placement in special ed, the consent to access private insurance, those things are signature requirements. And so there's a couple things that can happen there. Those signature pages can be uploaded into the system using what we call paperclip, and or can be maintained in a physical file at the school office, LEA department, and so forth. Different practices and procedures are at play locally, but we would not be monitoring for signatures on an IEP. Okay? All right, Abby has a question, so I'm going to unmute her. All right, Abby, you should be ready to go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you.
Okay, sorry. I wanted to ask, so you're saying that when the parents sign, that doesn't, it just basically is stating that they were present at the meeting. But it also means, though, if they don't sign, isn't there a place where they have to be able to state why the parent isn't signing, as if a parent doesn't agree with something on the IEP or so on?
No, there's not, actually. If the parent chooses not to sign, that's perfectly fine. They don't have to do so. The protection that is in place for the parent, the procedural safeguard, is the prior written notice states how long it will be before the action that the IEP team took will go into effect. And during that prior written notice period, the parent can pursue their procedural safeguards if they want to file a due process to stop the action, if they want to file a state complaint, if they want to call the state and request mediation or a facilitated IEP meeting because they disagree. Those are a variety of options. At the state level, at the local level, they could leave that IEP meeting where they didn't choose to sign the IEP and either contact the EC director, or depending on how the system is organized, there might be a program specialist assigned to the school, but they then can reach out to local leadership to explain or to share that they are in disagreement with the IEP and they would like to reconvene and reconsider and so forth.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understood that correctly, because what I've had just experienced this not too long ago as a special education decision maker for another child. So, and the attorney, when we were talking about it, kind of went going back and forth with the school. So I refused to sign the IEP, but the attorneys were saying that we did have to put in there why. So we actually do not. Is that correct?
That's correct by state policy and perspective. Now, you have perhaps stepped upon something at a local level that is a local level requirement that I'm not necessarily aware of. However, parents don't have to sign anything if they don't want to.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
All right, thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure. Okay, are we good in here? Any questions?
She had a question.
I couldn't see her. That was my fault.
I had a question just in respect of the non-signing. So with regards to minutes from the meetings and prime written notices, how a lot of times, certainly from my experience of meetings, the minutes don't necessarily reflect accurately what has actually taken place in the meeting.
Sure.
So with regards to signing of minutes, what's stopping things from being changed after a parent has left the meeting?
Okay.
In respect of those, or things getting added or taken away
Okay.
on documents?
Okay.
That's slightly concerning to me as a parent.
Sure. So there's a couple layers in response to your question, and I'm sorry I'm going to have my back to you while you're there. So a couple of things, and for those listening online, the question is around other meeting documents such as minutes, prior written notice. Prior written notice has to be provided to the parent before the action takes place. There's nothing that specifies that the prior written notice has to be given at the conclusion of the meeting. It just has to be given prior to the action taking place. So your question then, to follow up on that, is what if it is substantively different when you receive it than what you understand the meeting to have occurred and what has been decided upon when you were present. And so there is another parent right that triggers at that time, and that is the right of a parent to amend the educational record. And so if you believe that that does not, the documents you receive, the minutes, the prior written notice doesn't reflect your understanding of the meeting, you can write a letter stating such, and that you want the record amended to reflect what your understanding was. And so then the district has the opportunity to respond back to you about whether or not they'll make that change, and if not, what your rights are then at that point. Now that's just one. The second option that the parent has, if they don't want to get into this issue of amending the record, they can always request that the IEP team reconvene because what you received notice about and what you thought you were agreeing to did not match. And perhaps the IEP team needs to reconvene. Or, third curtain, you can also ask for a parent administrator conference or a parent teacher conference so that you have a good understanding that what they wrote is in fact what happened according to your understanding. In other words, there's multiple ways that you can make sure that the record reflects the understanding. Ultimately, though, the prior written notice must reflect the decisions of the IEP team. And so if there's a disagreement in what your prior written notice said and what you believe you were agreeing to, then you have some options for the team to come back together.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sure. Sure, come on up.
Yep.
My question is, when does an IEP, the actual document itself, become deliverable? If you have an IEP meeting and for whatever reason it is incomplete, and personally, we were discussing service time, so service time and placement were not discussed. We had began to discuss the service time. I did sign the consent to services. However, I was not consenting to a halfway written IEP.
Okay.
I would like to know, had no idea it was going to be delivered halfway written.
Okay.
I'm perplexed as to when it actually becomes a deliverable document.
Okay.
To be enacted.
Okay. So, one, it should be complete. So your instinct is right there. You should not be consenting to something that you don't believe accurately describes what your child should be receiving. So it sounds like this was an initial meeting that your child was identified for the very first time if you were providing consent for services. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And we had an IEP meeting, and it was quite long.
Okay.
And it was not completed. And we had a agreement to reconvene the following morning at 9 o'clock. And we all showed up, and the Guilford County representative was not there. And I am in staunch disagreement with the way that my children are being remediated. They are not progressing. And so I wanted to have that discussion, but I do not want to have that discussion in front of the teachers that are trying to remediate them.
Sure. So a couple of different options for you, and I'll just start with the procedural errors. First of all, an incomplete IEP is just that. It's an incomplete IEP. You don't have a complete program in place. So that would have been a procedural violation. You could have done two things. You could have withheld your consent for services until that IEP was completed. And but secondly, coming back to the table to complete it, sometimes meetings can run long and there is a part two, but the IEP is not considered the final IEP until all the services, all the goals and objectives, the supplemental aids and supports are determined by the IEP team. So in your situation, you have a couple of options going forward. If it's still not resolved, you can request another IEP team meeting to get those items resolved. You could call the EC director and let them know what your experience was. You can certainly have a conference with the school principal if you don't want to have a discussion in front of the IEP team about some other issues that are going on. But the way to ultimately resolve anything that is not been concluded is to go back to the IEP team and have another meeting and get that IEP finalized. Okay. There's some other options you have, and I might talk to you about them at the break if you want to talk about some other options. But for the IEP purposes and the purposes of demonstrating, I think I got you to the point that is good for this part. Does that work for you?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, very good. You're welcome. All right. This is really Stump the Chump today, isn't it? All right, you guys have been very kind. Are there other things that you have a question about? All right. What is the time for me, Tish? Is it now? Technically 12. Okay, so I'm going to grab a moment and let you tell me what you would like to see at this point.
You said that, did you, I don't even know now, did you say that, like, the IEP forms are in the ECAT system? So, like, when I go in for my son's IEP meeting, this is what I'll be seeing as they're typing in all of those different things?
Actually,
should
maybe, because, and I'm not trying to be coy here in my response to you, but you're segueing into something very important that I do want to share with the council. It is not our intention that your IEP meeting be watching someone do data entry.
Yeah, it often is, though.
Right. But I'm telling you from the state's perspective. Now,
Right.
keep in mind, there's local practices and procedures that are not a problem. They have local discretion on some things. But from the state's perspective, it is not we would not be saying that you have to have what is called a live meeting. I would never want a parent to use up their valuable time watching me do data entry. The regulations support, and we should come to the table with a proposal. Right?
It's never happened.
Okay.
So in a real life IEP meeting, when they are putting in goals and putting in, so it, can we see, just, you don't have to go through all the different sections.
Right.
sections.
So
I
I'm
just
going to
wanted
get on
see what
my
it looked like.
soapbox one more time before I show you what you want.
Okay.
So what we have created inside the system is the ability to create a draft document.
Mm-hmm.
And that watermarks every page of those documents as proposed. Because we have an obligation based on our educational expertise to create a starting point for the team to discuss. That is not predetermination. That is planning for an effective IEP team meeting. And so that's why those documents are marked proposed. So when they come into a team, you have something to start with, okay? So you start there and you're working through that. I think it would be a poor use of time to walk into my IEP meeting and see this screen.
Well, it's a very poor use of my time to sit for 2 hours, but that is what's necessary.
Okay, so moving forward, what I would want to, what the IEP team should be working for is a proposed copy. That proposed copy can be written on, it can be adjusted, there can be extra pages that are going into that proposed copy, because the meeting is supposed to be student-centered, not watching how wonderful I am at computer, not watching me stumble through these different tabs. The conversation is supposed to be high and tight on the student's needs. And so once that IEP, that meeting copy IEP, those adjustments can then, that's the meeting copy. That is what happened at that meeting. So if that is what the team agrees upon, then proposed can be crossed through, and that can be your final copy, okay? And it can be, a copy can be given to the parent that that's the final. Now, all of us type A people want it nice and pretty with no scratches through it, and we want it in the system. That's okay too. That doesn't take away the value from the meeting copy. But what I have to do is take that meeting copy, and then I get it into the system, and I finalize it in the system, and then I can print you and me a clean,
Right.
nice copy of what that finalized IEP looks like. So that's how business should work in an ideal situation. Now,
And I hope that that does for 99% of all of them.
right. So I'm going to take you into the system, and suppose I'm working on goals. So here I can add goals. And this show section button shows me what part of the IEP it would show up on. So you could display this during a meeting to see where it's coming. If I'm in the IEP again, and I want to look at the assessment summary, these are all the different evaluations that my child might have had conducted. I can see what the details are for them here. You know, there's a lot I could see, but let's think about assessment summary. I've given permission to do that. They've done it. This is the results. So it would be highly unusual for a team to be watching the input of data for assessment summary, because that needs to go in ahead of time.
Right.
Okay? Then the other part could be in the IEP, the services. You might be looking at services. This is where you can add special ed services if you're needed. Remember how it looked on the IEP that was itemized? I can show a section here for how that
And
looks
that
on the
just
IEP.
really just that menu is basically what I was looking for.
Okay.
Because my experience has been with the old system, we spent probably a good 20 to 30 minutes of the 2 hours for the annual, just them trying to find where things were. So I like this because I understand this. Just with my son's particular teacher, who is very, very sweet, but bless him. I kind of feel like we're going to be, well, I don't know how to do this. Why don't you? So I wanted to see that for myself, just so that if I do have to explain it to somebody else or another parent, what they, because I do like to do advocacy as well, just so that I could see what it looks like and be able to explain it. So the menu right there is perfect.
Yeah, so I just clicked on the Create IEP, and so I might leave parts of this IEP blank. Now, remember we talked about how the system would give us alerts. The teacher's going to get all kinds of alerts if they haven't done something complete, or if something's in wrong or something's missing, but they can still create the draft because they might not want to put all the services down because they might need to have more discussion about what would be appropriate for a student. So I might leave the entire services blank. Well, the system is going to go, red crazy telling you, hey, you forgot services. But that's okay because you're in draft. You can create a draft document. And so what the system is doing is telling me, you have errors. You can't make it final until you take care of these things. And we know that. But what's important here is that we have something to go to the meeting with. And so you can see the draft status here. And when I pull it up, there is the proposed watermark that I was telling you about. Okay, so it's on all of the pages.
And so going back to what the most recent mom had brought up about the incomplete IEP, so with the ECAT system, that shouldn't happen, right? Because
Well, you can leave it in draft format as you should to come to the meeting.
Right, but
and
I mean,
have
like, at
parts
the
that were
end.
incomplete to discuss.
Right. But what I'm asking is like this mom, she came in and
She could have an incomplete IEP because it hasn't been finalized yet.
right, but when her question is when do those documents become live? When does the plan become live? And she was concerned, if I'm correct, that the IEP was incomplete, and she didn't want an incomplete one to go live. So this system would really kind of prevent that from happening, right?
Yes, it alerts you that it's incomplete.
Awesome.
Okay. Then when you make it final, what I'm going into my meeting with a draft. We have our meeting. We make our changes on the paper copy. Now, it's also okay that if the LEA wants to have someone sitting beside the special ed teacher that's updating the system while the meeting's happening, not projecting it on the screen, but they have somebody that's a buddy taking notes, that's also perfectly fine. But we want to make sure that the meeting is student-centered, and we don't want to have technology getting in the way of that. So we go to the meeting with a draft. Now, locally, directors will establish their own practice for how quickly they want these finalized after the meeting. I think it's reasonable if there's a meeting happening on a Friday. I mean, it might be reasonable to have a 10-day window in the system just to get it finalized if it laps over a weekend or a holiday or so forth, because those alerts are going to be firing at you if it's not final. And the other thing is too, is you're not going to want to wait to the last day of your current IEP to have your new IEP meeting. So there is the notion of planning ahead of time so that if you have to have multiple meetings or so forth, you've got a current IEP in place while the new IEP is being worked on. Okay.
And in the system, does it alert? And the only reason I'm asking all these questions is because all of these wonderful things that you're saying should happen, I've either never experienced as a parent or have only experienced once. So, I've gotten a draft copy one time before an IEP. And then, like, I've never been the one to set the IEP date. So, what you're saying about, just in case you have to have multiple meetings, making sure that you do that a couple of weeks in advance so that if you do, all of that is, will the system in that, like, coming due, will that send an alert to the teacher, like, for that the IEP is going to be due in a certain amount of weeks?
Well, the
or-
alert is on their dashboard, and they will see that alert every time they log in.
But that's one of them, that it's coming due. Okay. Do you happen to know what the time setting is on that, or is it individual?
I think we set it at least 30, if not 60 days ahead of time.
Okay.
Told us in training the drafts will go away in 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
But you can always create another
Right.
draft from the data that's already in there.
Right.
It's not a big deal.
Okay, the last thing I want to show you is the student history. So what is here is the whole history. This is like the big filing cabinet of all finalized documents. So I can see when my child or my student was made eligible. I can click on the details button and get the eligibility there. I see when the parent gave me consent to provide those services. I have a green IEP. That means I'm current. Do you see the days here? So the days here tells you how many days on the IEP that IEP has been active. Okay. All right. And you can see they've done some testing with RTI and information there. All right. I think that might be a gracious plenty for our morning, but has anyone had something just burning that they haven't seen that they'd like to see?
It looks very intuitive. I mean, have you had any feedback from teachers who are starting to use it?
We have had lots of feedback.
Why y'all say it just system? I just got used to the old one. I've heard that one, so.
Well, and so
atypical feedback.
Yes, I think that in general, and I'm going to speak from what I'm hearing, and then not to put our LEAs on the spot, but if they choose to share any of their feedback, I'm going to open the floor for them. We have heard that they like the look of it. They like the way it's grouped together. They like the organization of the pages. I mean, as far as an interface, it's aesthetically appealing and it seems organized well. I think from that point in, how teachers feel about using the system, I think a pretty generous summary statement will be that the more you use it, the better you'll be. With any new thing, it takes a minute to get acclimated to where things are now located and how to develop things. I think there are some teachers that are a little cautious about clicking around in the system because they're worried they're going to mess something up. Yeah. So rather than clicking on things to problem solve, they might freeze and ask a question rather than explore a little bit further. I think one thing that makes people really panicked is IEP meetings that have come quickly after implementation, and they've had maybe a little less time to prepare and learn the system before that first IEP meeting has arrived. And one thing that I will say as a public service announcement is that in a limited scope, if an LEA has to use paper copies to do an IEP meeting, that is not a procedural issue with us as a state. It just then has to be put into the system. So for families that might be wondering, hey, I've heard this buzz about a new system, but I'm not seeing the new system, or I'm seeing forms I've recognized before, that's not necessarily a bad thing. What we are most concerned about as a state is that IEP meetings happen and that parents adequately have an understanding of what has happened for their student and the plan for their student, okay? So there has been a little bit of anxiety about the meetings that have come quickly, okay? So that might be just a little bit of a different experience. There might be a little bit more time at the meeting than you might have predicted before, or you might have paper forms for that meeting. Again, in a limited scope, I think it's reasonable for LEAs to have a little bit more time. The important thing is they have an effective IEP meeting, and then what documents they use at the IEP meeting then are put into the system so that we can collect that information. So, I don't know if you guys want to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, go for it.
You go? Okay.
First.
Well, we have 28 schools in our district, so we have a good many teachers using the system and a good many students. We're very excited about the comprehensiveness of the system, if that makes sense, how it all fits in and plays, and there's a one-stop shop kind of speaking, because our teachers used to have to go here to get this, and here to get this, and here to get that, and it's all right there. I was around when we first transitioned to CCAS, our system that we were using and have used forever. So I have to remind everybody that we went through this same moment of panic during a change, just because moving our cheese is really hard. And this first year, we knew and planned for the supports that we needed to put in place as a district, simply because, oh my gosh, I have an IEP meeting due in 3 weeks, and I don't know how to get to here. I don't know how to get to here. So it's like this panic. So we immediately regrouped and did an ECATS hotline and have all these people strategically placed around our schools, and we did a core ECATS leadership team. I think if we did not have that as a district, our teachers would be a lot more freaking out than they really are, because it's been those panic moments. But we've been able to pretty much, unless I've had to twice, and Carolyn, we need some help, I just can't figure this out, and we can't get an answer quickly. Most of the time, the turnaround is very quick when we put it in Zendesk. When we get with DPI, I think they have the same mindset about that. They're trying really hard. There were a lot of what I would say kind of glitches at first, but it has been a quick work through. I mean, things we've seen go through, so the teachers are excited. They're less anxious now the more they put it in. Their first year is going to be a lot, because you're having to enter a lot of information. But once they enter that information once, it's there, and they'll never have to. So we're hearing grumblings now, but it's getting better as each day goes.
And our our support service providers, the therapists, and do they all also have access to go ahead and enter
Yes.
their information
Absolutely.
before we get to the meeting?
Absolutely, yes, they do.
Okay, awesome.
Everybody does.
Well, here's hoping we're
You
under
wanna say
2
anything
hours this
different?
year.
Ditto on everything you said. So Carol Ann's got a pretty good read, and we haven't talked prior to now. So the other thing, I think that you hit on it about people moving their cheese, you're going to hear, and we're all going to feel like a little freaked out.
Oh, I mean,
just
new stuff
because
is new
it's
stuff.
New. From an administrative perspective, it's our snappy, and that main screen is like on
I
my
love that
external monitor all the
dashboard.
time. And it's really easy to shoot Bob a quick email saying, notice there's 3 kids that are red. Can you tell me about that? But I've had to be aware that when they're doing transition meetings, the previous IEP didn't come in as written necessarily. Sure, the service delivery time, area of exceptionality, and accommodations seemed to be very, very accurate. Limited challenges with that. But if they were to do a transition meeting for new students coming in that we were not aware of and able to do before, that's been either a choice of go ahead and do the annual review, or enter a whole bunch of data to be able to. So we discussed this year is going to be every single one you get in is one more you can progress monitor in the system. And at this point next year, we should have 100% of everything in and be, so it's kind of like a year transition from where we were looking, not like a 2-month transition, not like Power School that we turned off Sims and turned on Power School or whatever, old, but this is going to be like a year transition to getting.
Sure.
And yeah, so the report part of it though is exceptional.
Yeah. And I think it's got built-in compliance measures in it, so we're gonna have a lot more compliancy with our IEPs. We also have been able to just been able to catch a lot of kids that the parents may not have checked EC when they enrolled them or had an IEP or received special ed, and when the other schools sent their, school districts sent their paperwork, nothing EC was in there. So we've actually been able to catch kids pretty quick and jump in with services because we know those that come in now, anywhere in the state with EC services.
So they like if a kid moves into your district, it's automatically in there.
Yeah, so we know about it.
Perfect.
That's been one of our
We've had the
Yeah,
opposite.
I wanted to comment as well. I'm just piggybacking off of what you all said, but being in juvenile justice, we have students that are very transient and coming in from all different parts of the state. So the system is very user-friendly to us because everything is right there, because a student coming from Wake County, a IEP would look very different from somebody coming from New Hanover County. So now everything is looking the same, and our reports from the teachers are that it's user-friendly. They like the access of having everything right there. But just as you all were saying, some of our facilities have students that stay for longer periods, and then some students are there for maybe a month or so. So we have some people that are, even with CCAS, that didn't get a lot of practice with it. So we're doing ongoing trainings, one-on-one at our facilities, whole group. So that's going to be ongoing for a while, but just general feedback is that it's a good database to have.
So Jennifer Deegan from Charlotte has some comments she would like to offer. And Jennifer, I've taken you off mute if you're ready to go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm in CMS. We just had our training last week, or 2 weeks ago before school started, and I will say that we're all freaking out a little bit just because it's different. Easy IEP, but we went through this with that a couple years ago, so it's all a new process. I will say that it's been beneficial for my case managers. They're able to tag their gen ed teachers, and gen ed teachers now have access to the IEP at a glance. Parent contacts that we've made, EC contacts, so there is a lot of data. My assistant principals and principals use it now so that they're more familiar with what a progress is. So it's really helpful that the people in the building have access to it, so we're not always kind of running around. We're still trying to work out glitches with accommodations and things like that. There's still some things that are difficult, but I feel like we're working through them. There's a Facebook page for teachers of North Carolina with ECAT, and it's actually very helpful. So I actually stumbled through X7 yesterday, and someone answered some questions. So that's been helpful, just having different resources out there to use. But just be patient with your EC teachers that are new with this, because it is, and like I think someone just said, I'm not sure who was speaking, but we just started 2 weeks ago. So inputting all this information, it is a lengthy process to try to get it all in there. So just be patient with your educators. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer.
And Carol, this is Chrissy. I just have one more thing. We were in the pilot, so we actually kind of started this and knew this process a while ago. So we've been planning. We're kind of like maybe a year, months, a year, a year before. I mean, we've really been putting these processes in place for a lot longer. Yeah, a year and a half ago. So just wanted to say that disclaimer, as we have had a little bit longer than a lot of districts have.
Well, anything new is gonna, especially when it's this big and with this many moving parts and people, and it's gonna take time. But it sounds like, just from what you guys are describing, that there haven't been any glaring problems.
It hasn't crashed.
Not that they haven't been able to fix.
Hey, it's a good
Hasn't
day.
crashed. That's a good day.
You have a statewide program that doesn't crash on the first day. It's a good day.
Exactly.
I mean, we haven't lost any kids. No, we
haven't.
haven't.
We haven't.
In full transparency, there have been some things that needed to be added to drop boxes for more selections. The accommodations were the way the system was designed, it was forced choicing some accommodations across other areas that needed to be deselected. So we've worked on troubleshooting that item. On the reevaluation, if you're just doing reevaluation for programming, you're not dealing with eligibility. And so we're working on that right now, not to force the eligibility tab to fire. So that is in production right now. Just
some things that were not anticipated until we got it into the user's hands. But where we've been allocating our time is as those questions are coming in responding to questions, if it's an actionable item that we can take action on, we're diverting our efforts to doing the action, maybe then answering the question, so that there's a handful of folks that are triaging this on a daily basis, and so we're allocating our efforts to the solution sometimes ahead of the response. And so we're asking LEAs to be patient with us, because if it's something that is not as predicted, we escalate that for intervention. But as far as the system as a whole, it is operating as we expected.
Awesome. If I could add, this is Sherry. Excuse me. One of the things we've tried to do too, instead of sending messages all week long to directors to give updates on what's been fixed, where we've identified problems, we started this Monday message. And so every Monday usually by 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we send out a blast through our listserv to directors with this update weekly of where the targeted problems have been, where the fixes have been, things that we've corrected, things that we found, more information, and that seems to be helping to lessen some of the anxiety and some of the questions, because we're getting regular information out. So I think that's been helpful. I'm going to look to my local people to see, but
Ditto. I was just, I'd take the Monday message and shoot it out to people that I've gotten emails from saying this eligibility issue when they started their re-eval, or they just fixed the read aloud with the accommodations. So I just grab the parts that I need and send it out to them.
And we're regularly updating the FAQ, but sometimes that's laborious to go through to find. So that message, we're hoping, is so good. That's good feedback. We were hoping
And some
that
of
would
it
be.
just applies to
Absolutely.
us, like
Yes.
finding inactive students and such. But okay. 2 thumbs up to the Monday message.
Good deal.
Okay. I think my time is done.
I think so too.
I think I've borrowed some other people's
Is that
time too.
okay? We've completely missed lunch now.
Oh, I think Leanna's getting
I'm
cranky.
just teasing. All right. It is. Yeah, it is what it is. Very good. Thank you for all the information, for all the questions. I think it was very good information for us moving as parents, as administrators, what to expect. Let's see, just to go to lunch and afterwards have a review on the annual report. I might be pushing that to December, just because my timing has kind of gone out the wall this summer. I don't know where it went. But we'll discuss that after lunch. We'll try to reconvene here probably by 12:50. That gives us about 20 minutes, a little bit short, but we can eat while we're sitting here in committee after our public comments as well. So, our guests that are in the back, we have always had a policy where you're welcome to join us for lunch. We have food back there, usually too much. So, so we'd like to get to know you better and find out how we can support you and things like that. So once again, thank you for coming, and we'll break for lunch. Does that sound good, everybody? Yay! Okay. Good.
Following you all, I don't know what
Yeah. Did you see?
Yeah.
Caroline, noticed we had like 6 or 8 gentlemen that came in in the shirts and ties.